thank you to everyone who is attending, who is here. I know there are still some to arrive. I want to also thank, of course, Kathy and François for their amazing work on this amazing book, and Bev for her amazing editorial work on this amazing book. Most importantly, we want to thank Anne and Mary and Leslie from the Anne Innis Dagg Foundation. And of course, Anne is Anne Innis Dagg. And this is her story. And we are very, very proud to be publishing this story and introducing her life to a new group of younger readers so that they can learn to love giraffes in the same way that we all do. I want to thank Bookshelf for being our official bookstore and arranging to have some of the pre-orders signed by Kathy to ship out to everyone participating here. And before we hand it over to Bev for the Q&A, I'm going to give Barb from the store, who I've lost on my bar here, but I know she's here. I'm going to give her an opportunity just to say something on behalf of the book.
Okay, well, hi everyone. It'd be nice if we were all together, but obviously we're not. Okay, I just want to say that as a bookseller, I very rarely review. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
I don't like reviewing books of people I know because I only can be honest. I mean, I knew Kathy's books, they were great, but you never actually know what a book is going to be like. But I was there during that incredible afternoon with Anne, and even then I thought, this is a story that has to be told. So I thought, well, I'll just go for it. And I was like totally thrilled, of course, that I really loved the writing. The illustrations, I don't know, the indigo sky, the car, the giraffes, it all really fit beautifully together. And I'd like to thank you all because I think it's a real gift for people my age and every age, but particularly for younger people who don't understand what women had to go through to realize their dreams. So thank you all.
Thanks, Barb. And now, Bev, I'm going to hand the microphone and the evening's proceedings over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tracy. So I'm Bev Brenna, and I'm really the host of the next part of this book launch. Just welcoming all of you. If you have your microphone on and you are not one of our key panelists here, if you could just mute your microphone, that would help us all. And if we're having trouble with sound, I'll just address individuals and just ask people to mute. So that would be very helpful to us all. So again, I'm Bev Brenna, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our launch of The Girl Who Loved Giraffes and Became the World's First Giraffologist, a new picture book written by Kathy Stinson, illustrated by François Thisdale, and designed by Kong Nyo. It's published by Fitzhenry and Whiteside, and this is going to be a really exciting event tonight, broadcast nicely in advance of World Giraffe Day on June 21st. This launch is hosted here by the Bookshelf in Guelph, Ontario, and I'm speaking to you from Treaty 6 here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, also the homeland of the Métis people. And I'm conscious that we are coming together from across the country on various treaty lands on which we are gathered today. In addition to speaking with Kathy and François tonight, we'll also be speaking with Dr. Anne Innis Dagg. This picture book is about Dr. Anne, the world's pioneer on giraffe research, and who was, at age 23, the first person to go to Africa to study giraffes in the wild. We also welcome her daughter, Mary Dagg, who's here with us tonight, and she will come in towards the end of this launch to talk about their work with the Anne Innis Dagg Foundation. So you can see there's lots of creative magic behind this title, in addition to an absolutely fantastic product. First, I want to give you just a glimpse of how I came to be involved with this as editor. And then we'll move on to speak directly with Kathy, the author of this book. So basically, it was the summer of 2018. I was visiting with Kathy when she mentioned an idea for a new book, a picture book, based on the captivating life experiences of Innis Dagg, the woman who became the first world scientist to study giraffes in the wild. I had recently heard a program on CBC radio about Anne, and when I listened to it, I had said to myself, as I often do when I hear really great stories, someone should write a children's book about this one. When Kathy spoke about her vision for this book, I pretty much levitated off my chair with excitement. And lucky for me, the stars aligned for me to take on the role of editing this book with Fitzhenry and Whiteside. So Kathy, I'm going to start with you here with a question to help us understand the backstory to your decision to write this book. I've given our audience a sense of how I was hooked into this project, very willingly, of course, but what brought you to write this story? Oh, and let's have you unmute, Kathy, and we'll have Nan Forler mute, because I think that's maybe interacting. There we go. Kathy, over to you.
Okay, right. Well, I'm really, really pleased that that the bookshelf is our bookseller tonight, because it was at the bookshelf that it all began. They have what they call a Sunday Secret Cinema series, and so Peter and I went to the movies on a Sunday morning, not knowing what we were going to see. And what we saw was the most amazing documentary, The Woman Who Loves Giraffes. Yeah. And it was just a fantastic film. And as if that wasn't enough, there was a panel of speakers afterwards, which included Innis Dagg. And out she came, smiling as she is here tonight, and just standing ovation. And even before the movie ended, I thought, there's a kid's book in this. There's a kid's book in this. And once I heard Anne speak a little bit, I thought, I knew it. And at this point, I must thank Peter too, because he was the one who pushed me. Because I'm saying to him, I said, I think I should write a children's book about this woman. And he said, well, go and talk to her now. I said, oh, no, I'll email her later, because I'm not that, comfortable pushing myself forward like that. But I'm really glad he did, because I think that was what made the difference. For Anne to go ahead with her story, was the fact that we were able to meet face to face. I was able to visit her in her home, because we don't live that far away. And that's where it began.
Oh, thanks for giving us a glimpse of that backstory, Kathy. That's super exciting. And I think we just need readers to hear a little bit of your book to start with. So for those of you who have just joined us, we have Kathy Stinson here, author of The Girl Who Loves Giraffes. Mute your microphones if you've just joined us, because Kathy's going to read us a couple of sections so we can see what kind of wonderful story we have here on these pages.
And I am going to hold the book so that I can read it easily, and then I will show you the pictures, don't worry. The wonderful art by François Thisdale. It starts with "No Girls Allowed" #1 to introduce one of the themes of the book. Long ago, far from the hot continent where giraffes live, a baby girl was born. Her parents named her Anne. Soon Anne wanted to join the games her brothers were playing. They laughed and shouted, "No girls allowed." "Not fair," Anne grumbled. Anne's father, Harold Innis, was a professor. Her mother, Mary Quayle Innis, was a writer. Anne's first giraffe, the other theme of the book. At the zoo, Anne saw large animals in small pens. That didn't seem fair either. She gazed up at the tallest animal by far. The giraffe peered down. It looked right at her. The hair on the back of Anne's neck tickled. "Aren't you peculiar?" she whispered. "I want to know all about you." Giraffes are the tallest animals in the world. An adult male weighs as much as 2 grand pianos. Yet a giraffe has only 7 vertebrae in its neck, the same number humans do. Vertebrae are the bones of the neck and back. Anne makes a plan. Anne loved reading, especially about animals. She used index cards to keep track of every book she read. She searched long and hard for books about giraffes, but there weren't any. In an encyclopedia, she learned, outside of zoos, giraffes live only in the open woods and grasslands of Africa. I have to go to Africa, Anne said, where giraffes roam free and I can learn all about them. Her mother said, you'd better finish school first. Her friend said, won't that cost a lot of money? Her brother said, that's far for a girl. You'll be too scared to go. Well, she finished school, she saved up, and she wasn't scared at all. She figured out her way around a second no girls allowed problem until finally, almost there. For 2 full days and into the night, Anne drove. The air was hot. It smelled wonderfully unlike anywhere she had ever been. And she was so close now to where there would be giraffes. She would be free to study them for a whole year.
Saving when you bundle both home and car. Great one! How about home security settings? Home security.
One more problem. Almost at Fleur-de-Lis, Anne's car shuddered and sputtered to a stop. Slowly, Anne got out of the car, her heart pounding in terror. Step by step, she inched along the road toward the ranch. At every bump in the dirt, she gasped. At every rustle in the bushes, she jumped. If she were to be eaten by a lion or bitten by a deadly snake without ever having seen a single giraffe here, she would be really mad. And there you can see her little car there on that dark night. Well, that didn't happen.
Wonderful. Kathy, thank you so much for that reading. I'm conscious that our audience may want to know where they can purchase copies of this book. Certainly the bookshelf, the bookstore we're launching at tonight has signed copies available. So if people are able to go to the website, that would be one way to get your very own copy of this book. Kathy, I've got a question for you. And after that question, I'll go to Anne, Dr. Ann Dagg. And at that point, I'll have some questions for Anne. But Kathy, first of all, as I'm listening to you read, I'm just enwrapped in the story. And it feels to me as if I'm hearing it for the first time. I think your writing is so beautiful that we can read this story many, many times without getting tired of it. And that's the sign of just a wonderful writer. I'd like you to tell us about your writing process. I admire your gift in creating text that looks and sounds just right. Some of our audience might wonder if you came up with these elegant lines right off the bat, or how you ensured that the final product would read so perfectly. Can you tell us about your process?
Well, certainly as far as the reading so perfectly, Bev, you know you had something to do with that. There were still a fair number of awkward sentences when you got a hold of it. But yes, I must tell readers that it's far from sounding like that in the beginning. At the beginning, I guess I collect as much information as I can, and then I write the story as well as I can. And inevitably, there's way more to the story than what I can possibly include. And also, I'm so focused on getting
You put it up this way because looking up your nose.
getting the information. Murray, you need to mute. These are friends, I can tell them that. I'm so focused on getting as much of the information in and getting it as accurate as I can that the prose is totally inelegant and downright boring, really. And so I go through many drafts before I would even send it to a publisher, so that it gives it the best chance of convincing them that this is as wonderful a story as it is.
Well, thanks for telling us about that process. It gives all of us hope, I think, that we can, through practice, better our writing by listening to your strategies. So we're going to.
There is one other thing I have to say too, that as I did revise draft after draft, I would visit Anne. This was all pre-COVID. And it was wonderful to be able to share drafts with her because she would encourage me. She would be there with her. Oh, that's just super. That's super. And then she'd say, well, how do you know that? Well, I thought I read it somewhere. Well, I'm not sure that's right. And she would catch me out on all kinds of different things that I had to reword or look up again. And that was also a very, very valuable part of this process.
Oh, super. Thanks for introducing that. And if people have questions for Kathy, please feel free to add them to the chat. If you're a young person and you can put your age in there after your question, we'll do our best to get to any additional questions after I've sort of finished with this interview portion of the launch. We've got some nice comments coming in the chat as well. Lovely story, gorgeous illustrations. So thanks, Kathy, for your portion here. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Ann Dagg. And I had the great pleasure of meeting you, Anne, yesterday and having a chat by Zoom. And I really enjoyed learning more about you and your life. I want to thank you, Anne, for the diligent, lifelong work you have done on behalf of giraffes, and also for your work supporting gender equity for women. You are a real Canadian hero, and I feel very honored to speak with you. First of all, Dr. Anne, I would like to ask you to talk about your reaction to the idea of a picture book about your life. When Kathy first introduced the thought about having a picture book telling your story, what did you think of that?
What did you think of Kathy proposing the idea of writing a children's book about your life?
I can't hear you very well, but we're working on it, and we thought we were so excited when Kathy said she would like to write a book about me. I thought it made me laugh. Really, it just sounded so silly because I wasn't really much of a person, but anyway, and it was a wonderful exercise for both of us.
Now, Anne, I see in the background there, you've got some giraffe friends. Is there a story that goes behind that big giraffe sitting by your chair? Where did that come from?
Is there a story about Marilyn
Oh,
here?
yes. Do you want to give it? Because I wasn't there.
Great. The television show Marilyn Dennis.
Yeah, do you want to describe it?
Yeah, so Anne was invited to be on the Marilyn Dennis show. And after she was on the show, this was a gift from Marilyn Dennis. And so her name is Marilyn.
Well, it's wonderful to see
So now
Marilyn
she's a
there.
member of our house.
Wonderful to have Marilyn with us at this launch. And when you and I were speaking yesterday, we talked a little bit about your influences. And you specifically said that your mother was a very positive influence on your life. Can you talk about how your mom influenced you to become the great woman that you are?
Well, it's very hard to say. She was a very nice, kind woman, and she spent a lot of her time really actually writing short articles and were published in various magazines. So I guess I was very used to her being working away, and so that I would always be working away too, thinking that this is what women did, and that proved very, very good for both of us because we got a lot of work done.
I'm glad your mother was that kind of model for you and also supported you in doing what women at that time didn't do, which was at age 23, heading off to Africa alone to study animals in the wild. I admire your burning curiosity and your perseverance and your courage. Now, I've heard you speak, Anne, about going to school as a child at a time when people with who were left-handed had that hand tied to their desk and were forced to write with the other hand. What did you do when your left hand was tied to that desk?
Well, I just untied it. I just thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. So, I mean, talk about silliness.
Well,
Anyway,
I think we see that courage and that perseverance happening even there in childhood, and that, you know, the kind of good stubbornness that gets our goals met. And I have another question for you. This book spotlights a number of important moments in your life, from when you first saw a giraffe at a zoo, you were a child and visited the Brookville Zoo in Chicago, I think, with your family, and then growing up in Ontario and your goals to study giraffe in the wild, and then the barriers you faced as a female scientist, not just in supports related to actually doing the research, because there were barriers there too, but in equal access hiring at a time when men were privileged for faculty roles at universities. But you kept going. And in spite of these challenges, you became a leader in the field, writing books, starting with your first book with J. Bristol Foster called The Giraffe, which became, I know, a seminal textbook for anyone studying giraffes. And you supported other students and researchers. You have been called the Jane Goodall of giraffes and the founder of giraffe biology. So in addition to all your support for giraffe conservation, I'd like you to take us back to that time when as a 23-year-old, you first arrived in Africa and were able to see wild giraffes. Can you paint that picture for us of what that was like?
well, I arrived at the man who had agreed that I could be his, could stay at his ranch because they had a lot of giraffes. So it was dark when I got out of the car, and I was just, the car broke down about a mile from where I was supposed to be, and I knew I should stay there because I was safe there, but then I was just so scared that I got out anyway and thought, if they're rattlesnakes, so be it. So he let me walk. I walked to his place, and then another car came up, and I finally met him. And he was a very, very nice man. He was maybe 50, and he had 3 daughters, and they were off in California. So he was rather lonesome. So he was very glad to have another person around to talk to every meal. What was is that more?
And I think you were in a little car and you drove out to where the giraffes were. And can you speak a little bit about what it was like studying them from that car? I think Camelot was the name of the car, if I remember.
On the very first day, then after I arrived, I was near a water hole, and I thought, well, I'm not sure how to go about this, but I saw 2 giraffes in the distance, and I thought I'll just walk slowly to them and see how they reacted. And as I walked to them, they walked further away. And then it occurred to me that I'm not ever going to be allowed to walk near a giraffe because it will change its behavior. So then I had to think, what will I do? And then I thought, well, I'll just sit in the car all the time. So actually, for the whole period, I spent all my days in the car, in a very hot, small car. And then I wrote down everything that every giraffe did. And that's really what I did for the whole time.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you for that. I know if there's young scientists listening, they'll really be inspired by your curiosity and determination and how you kind of figured out how you were going to study the giraffe in the wild. With the inactivity, did you have to, do some stretching, or how did you kind of compensate for that?
What was that one?
With you sitting in the car so long, what did you do to be able, did you stretch? Did you get out at any point?
Well, I did get out of the car once, and then they all went away. So then I got in again. And so then I never got out again. And I just started just standing, or they became bored with the car just sitting there. So I was able to write down exactly what each animal was doing every, say, 5 minutes maybe. And
Wonderful.
so I've got huge, in the University of Waterloo Library, there's a huge thing of all the animals I talked or I described, if anyone wants to look at them, but not many people do, strangely.
Well, that's terrific. And, you know, it reminds me not just of the determination, but just doing what you had to do. You had to be in that car and stay in it and
Yes,
take the
yeah.
notes, and you did that. I feel that, you know, this is a wonderful book about you. We've got a wonderful author, illustrator, designer team, but it wouldn't have been such a wonderful book without you, because you are the wonderful part of it that makes this story. So I appreciate you answering these questions. I'm going to turn to François in a minute and ask him about illustration. But is there anything else, Anne, that you wanted to say to our audience today about you or your life or this book?
Well, we're really worried about the future of the giraffe because a lot of people are now killing them just for food. And so what we're doing is gathering a lot of money if people were willing to give some, and then we can send it over to Africa. And we already have two students with PhDs working with school children, so that this will be should work out really well.
Thanks for mentioning that. I think, you know, you're really doing some good ongoing work to save this beautiful animal. I've put in our chat the website of the Innis Dagg Foundation, and a little later this evening I'll ask your daughter Mary to come on board and talk about that foundation. But if people did want that website, I've put it in the chat now, so I appreciate you reminding us about that foundation. Any last words here before we go on to François?
Any what?
Any last words?
I didn't actually hear. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Just anything final that you wanted to say tonight before we move to François?
Oh, well, I guess just I hope everyone will begin to love giraffe. And recently we've been able to look at what a giraffe was doing in Africa while we were sitting in Waterloo, which is really exciting for the girls that are in our new what is it called?
Oh, Junior Giraffe
In
Club.
in the Zoom Giraffe Club.
Oh, beautiful. You know, I appreciate the work you're doing and that you're bringing people along that journey with you. So thanks again to you. I'm going to turn us to François now. And François, I want to talk to you about your absolutely brilliant illustrations.
Yeah.
I know that people will just sink into your artistry here as they read your book. I've been through these pages many times, and just as I can hear the words again and again and still just be entranced by them, I feel the same about your images. So I'd really like to hear more about two aspects of your work, François Thisdale. The first question is that the art in some books simply recreates what is in the text. And you have this amazing ability to use illustrations that take us beyond the words, adding details and ideas beyond what the text offered. So I want to know, first of all, how you decide what additional information to include, and maybe you can tell us about a couple of places where you've done that. And the second thing is, could you run through your process of creating these illustrations? I'm just wondering, you know, how you begin and how, you know, what kind of media you use. So those are the two questions, and I'll turn it over to you to share about that process.
First off, when I'm doing illustrations for a picture book, I like to think that I'm rewriting the story in my own words. I mean, I don't want to stick too much to the text to simply explain something that is already explained with words. A picture book to me is a kind of tango between words and images, and I like to figure out that the text and illustrations must dance together to bring some magic. This is a dialogue, in fact, and adding additional visual information, as mentioned in your question, I think could help kids in their experience of reading. So when you're asking how I decide to bring them to my illustrations, I would say that at first I read the text many times. I mean, I could read it 20, 30 times just to be sure that everything is inside of me. I make researches and try to bring some emotional details to the story, usually details unsaid in the story, something more, a suggestion, a destination. It could be some dates, some cities' names, a map, some stamps. But I can bring you some example made through the book. I can share here PDF to show you. Oh, I think that Holly must validate. Okay. This one.
You should be able to show it now, François.
Yeah. You see well, yeah?
Yes.
So, for example, on this spread where the little hand sees a giraffe for the first time in the zoo, I created a vintage ticket on the left, a vintage ticket of the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago, because it was not mentioned in the text, but I knew that it was the first time that Anne saw a giraffe in her life. Probably that I read it from our email conversations, and the number on the ticket is Anne Innis' birthday, so 25/01/33. So I searched on the web to put something that could, I think that these small hidden details could be interesting and could draw the attention of a reader eventually. So another example is in the opening spread here, where we see those two brothers who leave to play hockey. I illustrated the kids in different jerseys, you know, Habs and Leafs rivalry, and I think that it wasn't an humoristic way to describe how it could be sometimes complicated to be brothers. You know, you have you hate and love your brother by the same time, and I know what it is. So, and another good example. This one is a good example of how I like to change things. So the shadow of the table becomes the shadow of a giraffe in an African landscape. I think it talks by itself. We can feel the aura of Anne was impregnated by Africa, and call her souvenirs or trips, their researches, all her life based upon all this great job that she did. And it's like if her mind is becoming in a certain way Africa just there. So I like to bring the reader to imagine, maybe to get his own vision of and here, well, finally in this one I created tears in the landscape at the back. So it's like if the gray sky is crying a little bit. It's kind of a contrast between the beauty of the giraffe and how it became now an endangered species. So these are some ways I found to change a little bit the dynamic of the book by putting some hidden details in my illustrations. And when you're asking me how I'm working at first, you know, a picture book starts always with the reading of the manuscript. As said, I need to understand characters, to learn from their stories, and eventually to try to feel how the character are in the book. So I start with sketches. So I'm doing sketches like if I'm in kind of travel, you know, with a sketch pad, watercolor, and pencil. And from there, when all sketches are done and approved, I'm starting to work with photographies or to shooting some pictures of things I want to be in my illustrations. I create the illustration by doing a collage of photographies and painting, and it gives something like that. So at first it's only in a halfway illustration. Then after a while, I'm taking this proof, I print it, and I paint over with acrylic. So, you know, it's quite different. And so you can see here in my studio, I like to work with painting, brushes, and you know, every single story is almost the same for me. I like to drink my oolong tea. I like to sit in my studio and to work hard on my illustrations. And at the end, well, when I like to do some. I like to be here in my studio and to do some bicycle. Because every day I'm taking my bicycle. Here is my my house on the left, and my bicycle. And I think it's a good way to get a clearer mind and to be able to be efficient and to be productive. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Francois. Very interesting to hear about your process. And I'm sure the young audience today, as well as older audiences, are really intrigued by the idea that our work doesn't have to be perfect to start with, whether words or illustrations. It's really a matter of a layering kind of technique. You talked
inspiration
about acrylic.
Because when I was young, you know, when I started to work on this book, I told it to Peter, I think, I found old letter I've received from an uncle who was living in Africa, in Tanzania. So I used these letters, these stamps to bring something more in my illustrations. And I remembered how special it was to receive these letters. You know, you have to cut the aerographs, you don't know exactly how, and it's always full of drawings and that and stamps. It was so, it was fantastic. So I tried to keep that kid's point of view when I started to work on these illustrations.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And there is a lot of you embedded in these illustrations. You spoke about magic, and I think there's magic in the words, definitely magic in the illustrations, magic in the whole story. Many times I've heard people in the field of children's literature talk about how it's important that the text in books for young people doesn't talk down to them, doesn't limit their view. And I think the illustrations in this book don't talk down to children either. They respect their intelligence and their ability to infer and find meaning in the beautiful work you've rendered. So thank you so much, Francois. Is there anything else you wanted to speak about today before we move back to Kathy?
Thank you for that great to that great team. You're all wonderful. I love to work there, and you're so inspiring. It's been lovely to work on this wonderful text by Kathy and to work here at Red Deer Press and Fitzhenry and Whiteside. This is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you on behalf of everyone, Francois. So Kathy, I'll come back to you for another question. One thing I love about nonfiction and the book that we're celebrating today, The Girl Who Loved Giraffes and Became the World's First Giraffologist, it could be called narrative nonfiction, I think, because it tells real facts in a story-like structure, which makes it very exciting to read. And one thing I love about this genre is that the best work defamiliarizes a topic. It makes us think differently about it from how we used to think about it. Some of our readers might come to the book knowing a couple of things about giraffes, but I think they're going to be astounded at all the amazing facts you have included here about this animal. Kathy, were there some discoveries about giraffes that you found particularly captivating as you wrote about them and Anne in this book? Would you like to talk for a minute about that?
Sure. You might have to cut me off. I learned a lot about giraffes working on this project. I had seen giraffes in zoos. I had seen giraffes in South Africa. I was very fortunate to travel there a couple of times myself, but I did not know so many things. Anne's focus really was on behavior in her study of giraffes. And so some of the things were just astounding to find out how much of a giraffe's day is spent just wandering from tree to tree to feed itself. And that a giraffe will eat as much in one day, the equivalent in leaves, to the weight of a 10-year-old child. And I can't remember exactly what a 10-year-old child weighs, but in writing for kids, you always try to kind of come up with a concrete comparison that's meaningful, more meaningful than X number of pounds. That was one thing. Anne also had an opportunity a sad opportunity to study a dead giraffe at one point in her time at the ranch. And she hated it. I mean, she was heartbroken by this dead giraffe, but told herself, I'm a scientist. I have to take advantage of this opportunity. And one of the amazing things is when well, I read it in the first bit, didn't I, about the length of a giraffe's neck, and yet it has only the same number of vertebrae in it that ours does. And then she actually strung out the intestines on a clothesline and measured those. And that's really, really long too, like not quite as long as a football field. But then one of the most fun things, and this is more pleasant to talk about than intestines and dead giraffes, is that when a giraffe gives birth, it is standing up. And when you think of how tall a giraffe is, that baby giraffe drops to the ground about a long way down. And it's the thump when the baby hits the ground that gets it started breathing. But there's all sorts of stuff still being discovered. When we were chatting with Mary the other day, the book tells us that giraffes are pregnant for 15 months. But Mary told us that in fact, the giraffe has an ability to delay giving birth if they're in a situation where it's extremely dangerous, if they know that there are many lions around, or if just for any number of reasons this is not a good environment to give birth, they can actually wait. Imagine if we had to do that. Or had that ability to kind of, well, it's not convenient for you to be born right now. You better wait. Anyway, that I better stop now, but there's lots more of them in the book.
Oh, that's fabulous. I can just see, you gleaming with excitement at the amazing information in this book. I feel that the book will be a beginning for many readers of more discoveries yet to come, and maybe they themselves will engage in giraffe science and help add to what we know about this remarkable animal. So I'm conscious that science is never ending and it'll keep going. But back to the book, is there another passage or two that you could read for us now, please?
Sure. I'd like to kind of move along through the story. I'm kind of skipping over the actual study of giraffes that Anne did. That's a really neat part of the book as well. And you saw some of François' illustrations from that part of the book. But one of the tragic things was that in part because of No Girls Allowed #3 in Anne's life, she more or less disappeared from the giraffe world for a while, despite her outstanding achievements in the field. But oh yes, here, I have to show you the No Girls Allowed other illustration. Gives you a little bit of a clue as to what that's about. Supposed to take those off before you show them to the people. More than 50 years after leaving her giraffes galloping across the open grassland of Africa, Anne opened an email. We are having our first ever conference for people who work with giraffes. We hope you will come as our guest. Anne felt a tingle of excitement. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. I have not worked with giraffes in a very long time, but I would like to come. And François put Anne's updated version of the giraffe book in there, and he also caught the idea I had provided him with some notes about Anne, and he did provide lots of background of, he knew that she would have all kinds of giraffe paraphernalia. And maybe he could even tell that from the text, that a woman like Anne is going to just have all kinds of giraffe things. So our hero, from all over the world, giraffologists came, giraffe scientists, giraffe researchers, and giraffe keepers. They had all, for decades, been reading Anne's book. "You're a pioneer," they told her, "our hero. Your book made me want to study giraffes too." But like Anne, giraffes had slipped under the radar of many people. Giraffes in Africa were in trouble, big trouble. They were becoming an endangered species. "If we don't do enough to help them," a young giraffe researcher said, "it is possible that someday there will be no giraffes living in the wild at all." Anne shuddered. "We cannot let that happen." And the book, the text does include why giraffes are endangered. I won't read that part now, and you're familiar with this illustration by now. Back to Africa, Anne went to see what conservationists were doing to help save giraffes. Skipping over. Anne's love of giraffe continues. By the water hole where she had seen her first wild giraffe, Anne stood very still. Eventually, a giraffe sauntered near. Anne smiled. It was just so magnificent. She focused her camera. The giraffe turned and looked right at her. The hair on the back of Anne's neck tickled. "You are extraordinary," she whispered, "and I will do all I can to help save you." And I will not read the back matter, but I must show you, and for those of you who have not seen the film yet, there is Anne when she was a young scientist off to study giraffes.
Thanks so much, Kathy, for that particular section. It's so powerful, the words that Anne said, "I'll do everything I can to save the giraffe." And I'd like to call on Anne's daughter, Mary Dagg, who with Anne have started a foundation to do this very thing and help this work go forward. Mary, could we have you come on board here? I'm just putting in the chat again this website for the foundation in case people would like it.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. And actually, a portion of the proceeds of the sale of the book is going towards the foundation. So we're so appreciative of that. So our foundation really, we talked about kind of what should we call it, Drafts Unlimited, something like that. But we realized that people really have a passion for Anne and Anne's vision. So we knew that we really needed to work with an Anne. So that's why we ended up calling it the Innis Dagg Foundation. And the focus is really around raising awareness of how giraffes are doing in the wild, which is not well at all. In fact, their numbers are far lower than elephants, far lower than chimpanzees. People just aren't aware. That's why they call it the silent extinction. So this is happening. People just don't know about it. And the primary causes, I guess it's really about the habitat destruction. So if you think about wherever you live, if it's in, across Canada, we're sort of taking, if towns are getting bigger, we're just knocking down forests and farms and just adding more houses and spreading. And of course, that puts a lot of pressure on the wildlife. And that's a similar thing that's happening in Africa. As well, the giraffe meat is being sold for consumption, and the giraffe bones are being sent to different countries around the world as tokens of wealth, or some people will take a Bible and they'll put a giraffe cover around it, or they'll make a suitcase out of a giraffe hide. It's awful stuff. So we really looked and said, how can we help? What can we do about it? So our foundation looks at a bunch of different perspectives. One big thing, which Mom talked about earlier on, was around education. So getting and helping with the locals, helping them understand the importance of giraffes and how we can help them, learn to love them, learn to plant trees for them to eat, learn to, don't become a poacher when you grow up and become an adult, those kinds of messages. Another area that we're working on is around working with the locals who are either rangers, and they have these sniffer dogs and poacher dogs that they use, tracker dogs. So the tracker dogs are used to track rhinos or elephants or whatever it may be, or they use them if there's stuff that's going to be shipped onto a plane or a boat. They'll go through, I'm sure many of you, when you've been to the airport, when we could fly, there would be dogs that would come and sniff those things out. Well, those dogs weren't even trained to sniff out giraffe meat. They were just focused on rhino and elephants and ivory. And so the funding that we've been able to raise with the foundation is now going and training these dogs to say, hey, start sniffing for giraffe as well, because that's in trouble too. So those kinds of things. Another organization which we've started up, which we're super excited about, is called the Junior Giraffe Club. And that's targeted to kids aged between 7 and 17 that love giraffes. And we have, I think last count, we've got over 40 kids, and they're from 5 different countries. So we've got Canadians, Americans, we've got people from England, from Tanzania, from Jamaica, and we're continuing to grow this club. And the idea is really around making kids who love giraffes understand that here's what we do. Lots of stuff on the giraffe tongue, and one of the people online, Shannon, did a great thing on the teeth of giraffe, and so talking about the whole physiology. But we also talk about what's happening with poaching, with trophy hunting, and how the kids can help. So we're growing that club. We're getting more and more focus in it, and it's really getting kids engaged. And those kids one day will become giraffologists, we hope, and we'll continue the message and continue promoting and trying to get the awareness out there that giraffes really do need our help.
Mary, can you estimate for us about how many giraffes are in the world right now?
I think the latest count I've seen is about 70,000, I believe. I think even 15 years ago, there was over 100,000. So their numbers are going down extremely fast. They tend to do fairly well in South Africa, which is one of the richest countries in Africa. And they have game farms where they're able to raise them, and they're considered entertainment. So they make sure that the giraffe are well fed and taken care of. But lots of the other countries, they don't get a lot of tourism coming in. There's sometimes civil unrest. And if you're unable to feed your family and you see a giraffe, you're thinking, wow, my family can eat, or village can eat. Unfortunately, that's what you're going to do. And I understand that. It makes sense. And I understand that thinking. So that's another thing we're always thinking about too, is how can we help the African economy so that they're not having to take animals from the wild and be able to work and gain employment, and not have to get into the wildlife to take the giraffes.
Thanks so much for speaking today, Mary. I appreciate the focus that you and your mom have given to giraffe, but also the environment, because of course that's inseparable from the giraffe population. So I hope that people will visit your website to learn and maybe to support more, and just appreciate you and all you've done. So thank you so much.
Yes, I'll put the website for our Junior Giraffe Club online as well. Excellent.
Thanks so much. So Kathy, I'll come back to you then, and we're getting close to the end of our kind of more formal part of this presentation. I'll have another question for Kathy, and if people do have questions and would like to pop them into the chat, I'll be scrolling through that in a moment. If you're a young person and you put your age in there, I'll try my best to make sure we answer your question in the time we have. But Kathy, I really enjoyed meeting Anne today and through your work. And I know you have really loved connecting with her on this project. So Kathy, could you talk about what it's like to write a story about a real person? Were there specific things to consider? Were there any surprises along the way to working together? Kathy, I hope you'll give us a bit of a window into that process. And just unmute so we can all hear what you're saying there.
That would be a good idea.
Thanks.
It's hard to know what to say, because I knew from the film that I was dealing with a very strong personality. I have done a previous biography of a woman with a very strong personality and who wanted to tell me a lot about what, well, you can say this, you can't say that, you know, you should say it this way, you should say it that way. So I was kind of prepared for that, but I really, really wanted to tell Anne's story. And I feel at this point, before I go on, I should apologize for continuing to just call Anne Anne, but we did become friends during the process. And so it's just hard for me to address her, refer to her as Dr. Anne or Dr. Dagg. To me, she's Anne, right? She was not any of those things. She did not let me get away with anything, as I kind of alluded to before. But she was just enormously, enormously helpful. And I think it was just added motivation to want to do a really, really good job of telling her story, knowing that she was going to be here to read it. You know, at least I hoped she would be. She's not a young woman, and it's a very slow process publishing, but fortunately Fitzhenry did come through on that. But she was just an incredibly positive person and very encouraging. But I did love that she would say, you can't say that. Like when it came to facts, she was just an absolute, you know, you've got to get this right. For example, one of the trees that they eat the most is the acacia tree, which has incredibly long thorns on it, long, sharp thorns. And so I wanted to say something about the thorns hurting giraffes' mouths. And she said, well, you can't say that they hurt their mouths or that they don't hurt their mouths. We don't know. We don't know that. You know, and so she wouldn't let me get away with that. There was at one point I referred to the length of the giraffe's tail. And she said, that's just not possible. And I guess I had just gotten so carried away with the length of a giraffe. Anyway, I'm going a little bit off topic again, but
oh, no, that was lovely, and we're really coming toward the end of our time. But Kathy, is there anything more you wish to say tonight before we kind of look for a few questions in the chat?
Well, I feel that your contribution and François' and mine and Anne's and Fitzhenry's has been well recognized, but there's one person we haven't mentioned, and I would just like to mention Richard Dion, who was with Fitzhenry at the time that I submitted this idea. And he was the one who believed in this story and believed in my ability to tell the story and knew that François would be the right illustrator. And so he plays a very, very big part in what this book became. And so I do want to acknowledge him as well as the people that we've already recognized.
Thanks so much for your graciousness. So I am turning to the chat here, but I'm also putting Kathy's website into the chat. There's some information about this book on her website and some ideas for teachers, so that might be a useful thing.
Thank you.
And thanks to the bookshelf and the Fitzhenry team from all of us. So as I go through the chat, I noticed that there were a few questions early on just about editing. And one question was, does an illustrator have an editor? So I think I'll just take on that question. Well, as the book's editor, I sort of look at all the parts, and I guess it's my fault if anything doesn't work in the end. So I do look at the illustrations. The role of the designer, though, also supports the illustrations. And Kong Nyo, who I mentioned earlier tonight, was the designer on this book. Just a fabulous, fabulous, gifted professional. So thanks to Kong as well for the design work. Someone asked a question about media used, and as François was talking, he did speak about acrylic.
Acrylic,
yeah, on top of photographs.
Yeah, acrylic. Yeah. So kind of collage of photographies and paintings. Then I'm painting over with acrylic and watercolor, some collage. You can scratch things, some pencils sometimes, and after it's digital media over acrylic, just to be sure that everything is perfect, is neat, and so to make levels for contrast, everything. But it's a kind of alchemy, you know, between traditional and virtual mediums. So
nice. There's another question for you, François, and it was, how long did it take you to complete the illustrations?
Too long. It takes around, I would say for that book, around 4 months, because it was very long. I mean, I think that we have there 23 or 24 illustrations plus book cover. So I can say around, well, 4 months. It's hard to say exactly how many hours come. Sometimes I prefer to leave the illustration for a couple of days and work on something else, just to be sure when you're back that you step back a little bit and you're able to see small things. And at the end, I like to present all my illustrations to my wife with a graphic design teacher, so she can spot small little things. So thereafter, I'm sure that everything has been done. My editors saw it, Kathy, everyone. So
thanks, Francois. So really, you had more than one editor. So it wasn't just me, it was your wife alongside there helping with that. So good on you, wife. Thanks so much. What's your wife's name?
It's Marie-France. Marie-France.
Marie-France, thanks to you. There's
the
another
papers
question.
are very nice. The
Oh,
papers
yes.
that
Kathy's just showing the end papers. Can you hold up the end papers once more and make a sound, Kathy, so we get them enlarged?
Right. I forgot I couldn't be mute and do that. Yeah. Yeah. No, this was this was, I mean, Francois mentioned the number of pages. It's a 56-page book.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of illustration, and yet he still was prepared to go ahead and do these end papers as well, which I just think set off especially, you know, the contrast between the tones here and then the tones here, and just the magnificence of the animals that he so beautifully captured.
Oh, wonderful. While you're on, Kathy, there's another question about the use of the sidebars, and the person's wondering, you know, you had sort of some content and then there's some sidebars, and I'll maybe just begin about that, where we're seeing lots of nonfiction books for young people taking advice from the digital world and using some interesting forms and formats, including the use of sidebars, so that text doesn't have to be one big spread. It's little bits and pieces here and there, and color is used as well, often to communicate particular kinds of information, different fonts also. But in our case, Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about that process of sort of separating ideas out, sidebars, non-sidebars?
Well, yeah. I felt that the best way to tell Anne's story was to tell it as a story. And so that was part of it. But because I wanted it also to be about giraffes, that had to go into sidebar material. I didn't want to bog the story down with it. But also because of the time during which Anne was having all of her adventures, for lack of a better word, there were a lot of things like cameras and mail and different things like that work so differently, and even just the role of women in society at that time, or expectations of women and so on. So that was one of the challenges of the designer too, is how do you get all that in without it looking awful? And he just did a fabulous job, because the way I like, what I like is that a child who is really story oriented can just read the story and skip over the sidebars if they want and just go from page to page. Or they can pause and read because the sidebars always relate precisely to what's on that spread. Or a child who really doesn't care about the story and just wants to know about the giraffes can go to the smaller texts. And so that's, yeah, it was tricky. And of course there was, at one point, there was more sidebar material than there was story, so I had to correct that balance and give up on some of the material.
Super. Thanks for taking us through that. Just again, congratulations to you and to Francois, to Anne, Dr. Anne, to everyone involved in this project. Thanks again to the bookshelf as we close tonight, and the Fitzhenry team. Especially thanks to all of you who have supported us tonight. And Barb,
can I just say one thing before we end?
Absolutely.
So this time last year, I read an advanced reader's copy of a writer by the name of Madia Renand, and I said to her, this book is going to win the Governor General's Award, and it did yesterday. So I'm going to make another prediction. I think this book is going to win the Governor General's Award.
I love predictions like that, Barb.
Here, here. So thanks to you, Barb, and all your support with the bookshelf. We've heard a bit about magic. We've heard about the magic of the author and the illustrator and the designer and the subject. And there's one final sort of section, the magic of the people that speak about the book and promote it. And then the magic of the audience. And I just want to thank our audience for being here tonight on this beautiful spring evening. We had almost 100 people committed to being in this virtual meeting room, sharing this, celebration, this launch of this brand new book. So thanks to you, and thanks for bringing that final bit of magic, readers, to this beautiful text. So I'm just applauding you, and just all the best. Take care and stay well. And bye for now.
And thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank you very
for
much.
attending the launch, and we hope you and love the book as much as we do.
Thanks,
Have a great-
everyone.
Have a great rest of the evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
We stop.